Hey everybody, welcome back to Run and Gun. I'm JT, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to recreate that 1980s Outrun kind of feel. And here's a couple images if you've never really heard of that feel before. It's a kind of 80s style with the blues and the purples, and it just feels really cool. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to recreate this feel in Lightroom right after this intro. Alright, so we're here in Lightroom, and here's a couple images that I've applied this edit to. You can see that really nice blue in the highlights and purples in the shadows, and then same thing here. I did more of the blues in the shadows and the purplish reddish in the highlights. And then if we take a look at this last image here, the zipper, we can see both the blue and the red in the highlights here and very blue looking shadows. And they all kind of have this Outrun feel to them. So let's take a look at a couple different ways we can recreate this effect using white balance, using our HSL sliders, and using our split toning. So in this particular image, here's the after, and here is the before. So in this image of the zipper, I actually recreated the Outrun look just using white balance. So let's take our white balance and we'll slide it on down here, make it really cool. And we almost have it. It looks a little bit greenish, so let's add a little bit of purple. And let's keep cooling down that white balance. That's a little bit too much. We're gonna bring it back, and I think what I did is I actually brought down the tint towards the green a little bit. So that's getting closer. That's a little bit too much, but it's all about tweaking it and all about tweaking those highlights and shadows and making them look the way you want them to using white balance for this particular technique. So that looks pretty good. So here is what we did using just white balance, and here's the image we were aiming for. I think the only difference is a bit of clarity. So let's pump up the clarity a bit. And I think I also might have added some tone curve to the image. There we go. Pump up those highlights a touch and pump up those shadows a touch with this curve, and that looks pretty darn good. So let's check out this other image. It's actually a wide angle of the zipper as well, and see what we can do to give this image that Outrun feel. So this is our before shot before we've done any editing to it, and here is our after shot with those nice bluish greenish highlights and those purplish shadows. What I did in this particular one, I started with the white balance as well. I'm going to bring down the temperature quite a bit, and that's really close to what I want. Also going to bring down the greens, bring in the greens in the tint. And then I'm going to go down to my HSL sliders right here. And now you can see I have the hues that I can play with. I have red, orange, yellow, green, aqua, blue, purple, and magenta. And I have this target selection right here. So I can adjust hues just by clicking this and then clicking on my image and sliding up or down. And look at that, I can change the hues in this image. So I can change these purples, slide up and make them a little bit more red. That's a little too much. Or I can slide down and make them a little more bluish purple. So I'm just gonna play around with some of these colors. I'm gonna zoom in here and I can play around with some of the orange. I'm actually gonna slide the oranges and yellows up, make them a little more orangish red. I'm going to take some of these greens and slide them up until they're blue. I'm going to zoom out again. We're getting pretty close. We have some bluish purple here. I can bring that back into the blue, and I can just keep going back and forth and play with this with my white balance up here until I get this exactly where I want it. I'm going to add some more blue in the white balance, and that is pretty close to the effect that I'm going for. Let's take a look at the image we're trying to recreate and the one that we just created. I think it can use some minor adjustments in the HSL slider. Let's bring some of those reds back in to our image. So let's go back to HSL, bring some of that red back, bring the purple back from blue to red a little bit, and I think we got pretty darn close. That looks really good to me. I also went in and messed with the tone curves, I believe. There we go. Lift those shadows just a little bit and then bring them down and then pump up the highlights a touch, and that looks pretty darn good to me. So let's check out one more image. Here was the before image that I was working with. This is another ride called the Hydro, and then here was the after our edit. Everything in this image just looks super cool. So let's start editing. I think our white balance is good for this one. I'm just mostly gonna mess with our HSL sliders, and then I'll mess with our split toning a little bit. So let's grab our selection tool and start playing around. I think I'm gonna make these a nice teal blue, and I like the reds in here. Let's zoom in. And we have up here on the ride, we have some orange. I'm gonna drag that down and make that red. So what that's gonna do, it's gonna take a lot of this orange and yellow in here and turn that red. I'm gonna go around and I'm gonna select some colors that I really don't need, like this green, and I'm gonna slide those and make them blue, just so we can kind of eliminate some of these extraneous colors, and I can make them the colors that I want to. So I'm gonna select that green. Don't want it to be yellow, I want it to be blue, and then go in here and select these and make these colors that I want them to be. So as you can see, I drag these reds more towards the purples, and now I'm gonna open my split toning down here. And what colors should I have? I think we have the highlights as blue. So let's select blue and turn up that saturation. That's looking good so far. And then our shadows are gonna be a purplish, reddish, magenta color. Let's bring up that saturation a bit. I'm gonna make those a little bit more purple. So let's see, I think that's getting pretty close. Let's take a look at our before and our after. We still need a little bit more, so let's bring in the saturation for our blues and just slide this around. And let's pump up the saturation of our shadows quite a bit. And we'll start to get that vibe. So looking back and forth at the image we were trying to recreate and the one we started with, we're pretty darn close. It's just some minor brightness and contrast in here. If we turn down the contrast a little bit, we're a little bit closer to the image that we were trying to recreate. Turn down some of those highlights. I think I brought the whites down as well, but I think that looks pretty awesome. And that's the basics of how you can create this Outrun look using just white balance, using your HSL sliders and the target selection tool, and using split toning. Some really cool stuff. And another note in split toning, you can play with the balance here. So I can play with the balance between my purple shadows and my blue highlights. And I think that's really neat, is I can have more of the blue take an effect in the image or more of this purplish red take an effect in the image. And it just depends on how I feel. So when you think you're done with an image, I recommend doing something else and taking a second look at it later. Maybe go sleep on it for the night, go for a run, and then come back and see if you've over or under edited it. So that is all for this video. Make sure you also check out my contrast hack that I posted last week. I think those are super helpful in editing these images as well. So that is all for this week. I hope you guys like this Outrun tutorial. If you want more videos like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, and I'll see you guys next weekend. And until then, get out and go shoot.